there is some tremendous ways to do it, but how do we begin to identify those ways and go after them? And so, you'll notice on the slide here that I mentioned, whenever I kick off a BI project, and I work as the SQL Business Intelligence, practice director here at Neudesic, so I kicked off a bunch. One of the things that I'm constantly looking for is how can I increase profit, decrease loss, increase shareholder value, so that when we get done with this BI project, that there's actually some sort of manifestation of some return on investment. And oftentimes I'm asked the same question by quite frequently is, can a BI project really do this? Can they really drive profitability? Or is it really just kind of making people more efficient so that the business can become more profitable? And is it a chicken and egg story? I'm not really sure, but there really is. There's a study that was done a while back by Keystone Strategy. And for anybody that hasn't read this white paper, I suggest you find it. And if you can't find it, email me. I'll either send it to you or I'll send you a link to it. But there was a company called Keystone Strategy, Inc. that did a fairly large survey a while back of mid-sized companies. And one of the things that they did in their survey was they actually went through and did a kind of a scorecard, if you will, of IT capabilities. Not necessarily looking at, do they have a CRM system installed? Do they have an ERP system installed? Do they have a finance system installed? They're not really looking at that. What they were looking at were business scenarios, like can they close month-end easily? Can salespeople get all of the customer information that they need? And can they get it remotely? And so they go through these kind of business scenarios. Interestingly enough, the top 25% of IT-capable companies spent less on IT, had a higher profit margin, and actually grew faster both on the top and the bottom end. So they actually made more money and they sold more products or generated more revenue, both net and gross. And so, in fact, I pulled a chart out of there, and you'll notice in here that there's actually almost a near parallel growth from the bottom 25 to the top 25 of both IT capabilities and annual growth rates. And so you'll see the top 25% on the top row in both categories have seen a tremendous amount of growth just by enabling certain capabilities. So can IT drive profitability? Well, there's some correlations that say there absolutely can. And so because of that, I think CRM being kind of the lifeblood, or customer management, or customer information kind of being the lifeblood of almost every company out there, then CRM BI, if you will, or customer management, customer intelligence, that type of stuff, becomes a very foundational and very important piece of information that I think can be critical to the success. In fact, in Keystone's study, you'll notice on the slide here, is that the very first area, as far as functional areas that they listed, was sales and marketing. And in that sales and marketing functional area, 5 of the 8 scenarios in there were all based around customer management. Now, considering they only had 40 scenarios across their whole entire scorecard, and 5 of them are around customer management, we're looking at over 10% of the overall score, just based on the ability to manage customer information. And again, this is an IT capability scorecard, not a corporate one. So this is just within IT. So with that, I think what we're really running into from IT's role inside of customer management is 3 things that I think are kind of fundamental and foundational. And you'll see them listed there at the bottom of the slide. One is a foundation for data input and storage. You got to have a CRM system. Does that mean you have to buy one out of the box, or you can use, Goldmine or something? Depending on the size of the company and your budget, that's a decision to be made by the IT department. But you have to have some place for input and storage. You have to be able to measure existing customer, management processes. And in this case, this is, most of the time, these are going to be your out-of-the-box reports. These are the standard reports that your CRM systems are going to give you, with some enhancements. I want to add this filter. I want to add this field in here. And this is kind of the place where a lot of the organizations that I go into today, this is kind of where they're at. They've got a CRM system up and running. They've taken the out-of-box reports and deployed those. And now they spend their time kind of tweaking and turning on those, providing new perspectives, new views, kind of at the business's request. But I think that the third bullet is where we really start to run from, from just kind of data visualization or, static reports into true business intelligence. And that's where we begin to highlight the areas for optimization. And not only that, but also enable optimization. And that's really where I'm going to spend the rest of the conversation today, talking about how we can begin to enhance and optimize the business processes around the kind of customer relationship management, if you will. So as BI partners, and I'm going to go back to kind of the reference that C-level executive made, and I'll use that reference actually a couple of times throughout the rest of this presentation, is that I really think we do need to come along as kind of business partners. And as a consultant, I kind of see that as my role fairly regularly, but I also know that I run into a lot of people within the kind of enterprise IT, the people that I come in and work alongside inside the company, that still kind of think of themselves as report developers, report designers, answering the requests. And so for those people, I think this is kind of a critical conversation today, and one that I think, you should probably continue to have beyond today with me or with somebody else, talking about how you can begin to move or kind of elevate that relationship into a business partner relationship. And so, and I think there's one point that I make kind of really in the middle of the slide, kind of towards the bottom, that talks about not coming to the table ignorant or empty-handed. Obviously as a business partner, we have to bring something to the table, and then there's a feedback loop where, they're going to say, yeah, that sounds great, or no, you know what, I really don't need that. But at the end of the day, I think one of the things that becomes critical is as business partners, we have to do our own research, right? So, if I were today inside of an enterprise IT organization and I were in charge of business intelligence or in charge of CRM systems, I'd be reading books on, say, customer loyalty. In fact, there's a really good book that I just finished up just recently by Jill Griffin called Customer Loyalty that talks about how to kind of measure customer satisfaction versus customer loyalty and the differences in what you should be measuring and how you can actually begin to generate additional revenue by modifying or altering the way that you drive those relationships. And if I were in fact in charge of BI today, that would be one of the things that I'd be looking at, so that I could come to the table with the sales and marketing organizations with some recommendations around some ways that we can enhance and optimize kind of this process. And so I've actually gone through and pulled a few ideas out from a couple of different things that I've read, and I'll share that with you over the next 20 minutes or so. So first thing and foremost, to kind of get started, is I wanted to make clear that we understand when we talk about CRM, that CRM data is in fact very rarely all located just inside of the CRM database. I've only seen a couple of organizations, and they were usually pretty small, where they had all of the information inside of one single repository. In fact, most of the time, they've got data for a customer across probably the better part of a dozen different line of business systems. And that's, I'm sorry for the acronym in the middle of the slide, you see the big LOB in caps. That stands for line of business. I apologize for the acronym there without the description in front of it. But basically what it is we have leads databases, you have finance systems, you have ERP systems, help desk ticketing systems, customer support systems, not to mention the CRM systems, that all could be owning and actually storing certain pieces and bits of information around your customer. And when we start talking about CRM BI, if we limit ourselves to just the CRM application, then we'll be limiting ourselves to just a fraction of what the information that is within the organization. And we'll also be mitigating the kind of the value that will be available to us. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we slide along. But I think what we really need to talk about, though, and the point that you'll see as I'm making as we slide along through the rest of the presentation, is that we have to see our customers holistically, not within the confines of a CRM system. So I'll give you a quick example. Just the other day, I'm on the phone with AT&T. I'm actually having trouble with my cell phone. And so I'm on the phone with customer support, and we put in a support ticket, and it doesn't get fixed. So I call back, and I say, hey, we need to get this thing fixed. And they say, oh, okay, hold on a second. So they go back and they see the support tickets there, and they're going, okay, hold on. And so then they resubmit the ticket, and it doesn't get fixed. So I call back again a couple days later going, okay, this is ridiculous. This is now the third time I had to call. We're talking now 2 weeks. This still hasn't been fixed. What do we need to do? And so seriously, the customer service representative tells me, looking me dead in the face, oh, what happened was they fixed it in system XYZ when they should have fixed it in system 123. So it didn't get fixed. And I don't have access to 123, so I can't fix it for you. Now, from a customer support standpoint, that's, fairly difficult for, as from an IT guy, I understand how that can happen. From a customer standpoint, though, it's almost unacceptable. But unfortunately, that's the way we begin to treat customers today, is by the line of business systems that their data is within, right? So you can deal with a customer from a finance perspective as long as that data is in the finance system. You can deal with them from a customer relationship standpoint as long as it's in the CRM system. What I'm talking about, though, is that as we begin to start exploring CRM BI, that we get beyond the line of business systems and actually start dealing with customers as customers and the data points that are associated with them beyond just the systems where the data is contained. And with that, there's this thing that, and I'll talk a little bit more about it as we kind of slide along a little bit farther, but one of the things that I want to talk about, though, is this kind of master customer record. Now, this is a spin-off of master data management, but please don't confuse the two. I'm not talking about master data management. What I'm talking about is a kind of a master customer record. And what this master customer record is this is the assembly of kind of all of the data points and the properties that are associated with a customer, regardless of the line of business system. Now, what happens, though, is when we start to do this, and anybody that's gone through this process of kind of building a data warehouse before, one of the things you always see is that there's overlaps of data. There's duplications of data. I've got a billing address inside of a CRM system and a billing address inside of a financial system. So what do we do, right? And so part of this master customer record is then going through the process of also figuring out what is the system of record. And when we talk about the system of record, that's basically the owning line of business application. So in the case of a billing address, the billing address inside of the finance system application is probably the correct address. The billing address inside of the CRM address, inside of the CRM system, is in fact probably just a duplicate. And so when we start assembling this master customer record, we want to then take the values from each of the systems of record, or the systems that own the data point, and assemble them so that I can get one complete view end-to-end of effectively all of the data points that we own on a particular customer. Now, am I going to assemble it all in one place? Not right away, right? It's a big, long process. And anybody that's gone through a data warehousing process or gone through a master data management project, these are incredibly difficult, time-consuming, and expensive ways to solve the problem. And I'm not suggesting that or recommending it by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, I think we also need to stay focused on the value of the process, that data mapping process, that both master data management projects and data warehousing projects, which are fairly similar type of projects when it comes to the mapping perspective, the value that they bring. And I think as we start to look at, CRM business intelligence and customer information, that we also have to have that same kind of mindset. Now, that said, I think there's two areas that, two kind of key performance indicators, if you will, or two metrics that stand out as areas that I would almost always recommend that customers start. So if today they're looking at just standard out-of-the-box CRM reports, those, hey, who bought what, and who did we contact, and how long have we been contacting them, and did they buy anything, that kind of thing, and they want to start moving into true business intelligence, there's two areas that I usually start pushing, saying these are probably the best areas to get started. And one of them is around customer conversion, and the other one's talking about customer loyalty. And I'll talk about each one of them in a little bit longer, in more depth. So in the customer conversion portion of it, what we're actually doing is tracking, the leads that we generate. So most companies have either an inside or outside sales organization, or they purchase leads of some sort. And so they start with this big, long list of names and phone numbers that aren't necessarily in their CRM system because they are just a name and a phone number. And so they'll start with them inside of this lead system, and then they'll be contacted, and there might be some interest there. So at that point, then they get put into the CRM system as a prospect, and they get contacted again, and then they may actually buy something, and so they get kind of promoted up then as a customer. And then they buy something again, and we get kind of this repeat customer, and they start buying more of our products, and so then they turn into a client, and they start generating referrals for us, and so then they could potentially turn into this advocate. Now, this is one kind of progression. There's others out there, and the progression isn't necessarily the point of the conversation here. But the point of the conversation is the fact that in almost any organization that's dealing with customers, there is a progression, and that progression is going to go from some sort of lead outside of our CRM system to some sort of advocate, if you will, somebody that's a good customer of ours that's going to be providing referrals for us and is a large percentage customer. What we want to be able to do from a CRM BI perspective is to be able to track that, right? We want to understand, where do we get our good leads from? How did our leads, what was the best conversion from a lead to a customer? And then, based on advocates and referrals, and clients, some of the best ones, where did they come from? I think, there's a gut in most of us that say, hey, referrals as a lead source are generally really good customers. And in fact, I think there's been a number of studies that have proven that out. But in your business, that may or may not be the case, right? And can you prove it out? Can you prove out that $10,000 that you spent for that lead list from some, email organization or marketing organization, in fact, returned anything? Did you get any value from the names on the list? And if so, how much? Was it worth it to buy it again? And so these are the kind of the questions and the conversations that you, from a CRM BI perspective, should really want to be able to answer those questions. And in order to do that, though, that's going to require a whole host of data points being assembled, right? That means we have to go outside of the CRM system on the back end, and then the CRM system is probably not tracking all of the purchases. So that means we may end up having to go to some finance system or ERP system or wherever it is you happen to be tracking your finances at and the purchases and get those in there. And then we get the whole referral system. Where's that information being tracked, right? And there may or may not be anything tracking those today. And depending on if there's incentives given, some organizations, if a customer refers another customer, they're given a $50 bonus or something like that off their next bill, which means you have to track that. So then now we at least have the information someplace. And if we don't have that information, maybe we need to, right? If we know, empirically that referrals are the best source of leads, then, from an enterprise standpoint, are we doing anything to help drive referrals? And as a business partner, from an IT standpoint, this may be something that I want to point out. Going, hey, we know that referrals empirically are the best leads, and today we don't have any process or any kind of business marketing campaign that drives those leads. I've got a system over here that can, in fact, capture that information if you want to begin to, employ this marketing campaign, and we can capture this information. And I think then you start to truly then begin to drive profitability as a BI partner. So, and the second piece that I wanted to talk about was then customer loyalty. So the first one is the conversion, or the customer conversion from leads on up. The second one is once they become a customer, how do we then track, what we used to refer to affectionately in the past as customer satisfaction. But, that whole customer satisfaction piece is actually beginning to get kind of debunked, if you will. And in fact, in Jill Griffin's book, she pointed out a number of statistics, and I threw them on the page here for you. I thought the interesting one was the one in the middle. It says the Harvard Business Review, that 8 out of 10 satisfied or very satisfied customers will switch suppliers without hesitation. And there's, the Forum Corp, 40% of satisfied customers will change suppliers without hesitation. The fact of the matter is that customer satisfaction, as the customer declares it, is in fact not an indicator of the fact that they're going to stay with us as a supplier, right? They can quickly and easily, and they show that they have through the through Simple Trends, they will switch suppliers regardless of satisfaction. And so, you'll see up in their headlines says customer satisfactions are not enough. So then the question becomes, well, if we can't just take simple customer satisfaction surveys, which is what most people like to do today, is let's just take a survey. We'll ask people how satisfied they are. If we can't take that and use that as an indicator of our customers wanting to stay with us or not, then what can we begin to track on, right? And there's a couple of things there that, if you read Joe Griffin's book, and I think it's actually fairly similar, I've kind of flipped through a couple of other customer loyalty books, and they use a very similar type of, paradigm, and that the elements that they're talking about are things like retention, how long has the customer been with us, and market share. Right, and that is the market share is how much. And it looks like I lost a piece of text out of that slide. So there's the market share piece is actually referring to of the number of products that we sell that a customer purchases. How many of them are they buying from us, and how many are they buying from a competitor? And then there's another one, kind of on a macroeconomics level that says how are we doing compared to, our competition. But in the case of CRM BI, we're really kind of talking about the wallet share, if you will. And that wallet share is for a customer that spends $6,000 a month, or, in the case of my wife who spends $1,000 a month on groceries, how much of it does she spend at Vons versus, Albertsons? And I could tell you it's pretty close to 50-50, just simply because Albertsons has some products that Vons doesn't, and Vons has some products that Albertsons doesn't. And so she feels she has to go to two different markets to be able to get everything that she's looking for. And so if either one of them were to do a study and said, hey, you know what, how much money does an average family with 5 kids, I have 5 kids, how much does an average family with 5 kids spend on groceries? And then we see Mr. Muise here only spending half of that with us. Maybe it's safe to assume that we're losing a fair portion of his revenue, right, because we don't have his market share. What can we do to then begin to identify the things that he's not purchasing? And if Vons were to go through and begin to look at that, they could even do some analytics and find out, what, Mr. Muise doesn't spend any money buying eggs with us. And the reason we don't buy any eggs from him is because they don't sell the big, like a half pallet of eggs with the, 72-count eggs. My wife has to go to another grocery store to get that. And so with a little bit of BI and a little bit of analytics, they could begin to identify those kind of information and identify the gaps. And sometimes it takes a little bit of, a little bit of intelligence and a little bit of, digging and researching. But at the end of the day, there's a couple of things that you want to look at. So quick recap, phase 1. Sorry, I was just checking my time, making sure I don't want to run too far over. So quick recap, 360-degree customer view. Everything I've been talking about up to this point in time is basically just, from an IT perspective, we have to get beyond just simply looking at, setting up, managing, and maintaining an IT system, a CRM system. We have to begin to progress into this business partnership. In order to progress into this business partnership, we have to then educate ourselves. And in order to educate ourselves, then we can then begin to bring something to the table that provides some value around how the business side of the house can begin to optimize and engage customers in a way that's going to, make the company more money. And as a stockholder, this becomes, important to me as a stockholder, and it also becomes, important to me in my role within the company, because quite frankly, if I come to the table as a business partner rather than just as an IT, manager and maintainer of a CRM system, I've also solidified my role within the organization and, increased the value of my role in the side of this organization, which, from my career standpoint is also a good idea as well. So if you're going to basically if you buy all those premises, then the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to spend talking about how we can begin to implement this in a way that's actually not too painful. So I titled this slide Taming the Data Tiger because it sounded really cool. But for those people that are noticing, the picture in the bottom right-hand corner, in fact, isn't a tiger, it's a lion. So I know that, sorry. But it was a cool lion, so I had to. So anyways, there's an evolution that we should go, that we can go through that provides a kind of a relatively painless foundation for us, an evolution that makes good sense. And I'll talk a little bit about this more over the next couple of slides, but ultimately you'll see in a lot of the organizations that I walk into today, and your organization may in fact be the same, is that today there's separate systems, separate interfaces. Today there's these line of business applications I talked about a minute ago, and there's departments that deal with those line of business applications, and each of them have their own kind of reports that they run around the customer, but there really isn't a good single kind of consolidated view. So typically where we start, though, as we start to consolidate this, is some organizations like to jump straight into the data warehouse and take on that big kind of big project around that. One of the things that I typically recommend, and one of the things I'm going to recommend today, is that you take a look at, there's a feature inside of SQL 2005 called the Unified Data Model, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. And by using this Unified Data Model, I have the ability then to begin to assemble, kind of these line of business applications into a single business model. I'll talk about it in a little bit. And then from there, I can begin to evolve into a data warehouse and start to gain some of the advantages that data warehousing provides. And then finally, I think as a business partner, we have to go beyond just kind of the data warehouse and the report query capabilities, and we begin to kind of consolidate the interfaces, where we begin to integrate BI back into the line of business applications, and we find ways that we can begin to integrate the line of business applications into a common platform. And I'll talk about these as we kind of progress. But the point I want to make on the slide, though, is that there is clearly a progression that you can go from kind of a stage 1 to a stage 2 to a stage 3, each of them being incremental, which reduces the amount of cost for any one stage, and each of them providing additional value. So at every step along the way, there's additional value that can be perceived from a business standpoint. So current state today, like I said, most organizations have these kind of separate systems. What becomes really difficult, though, is if you want to start truly doing BI. So imagine having to do, customer loyalty today, or having to do customer conversion, the two kind of, key metrics that I talked about a few minutes ago, having to do those today inside of this disparate line of business systems. I'd have to take a report from a lead tracking system, a report from a CRM system, and a report from an ERP system, and I'd have to line up the three and kind of tape them on the wall and hope that they kind of lined up straight. I'd have these Excel spreadsheets that I'd be copying and pasting a bunch of rows and columns into to try and figure out that today. And so it becomes very difficult and, in fact, frustrating for end users. And quite frankly, I would probably say 95% of the organizations that I walk in today with, their kind of separate system infrastructure the way it is, most marketing and salespeople won't even attempt it. They'll just go on and kind of hope that they're doing the right thing. And as long as they can continue to keep kind of growing by a couple of percentage each year, then, they've figured that's successful. When in fact, they're not really measuring it. They're just, hoping that things are working out for them. And they're just doing, either what was taught in school or, what somebody at a conference recommended or something along those lines. So what we want to start talking about is how we can begin to assemble these into a single, environment so that the businesses can begin to measure these things and still start to, not be frustrated and think that these things are possible, and they can begin to start to, as a business partner, begin to start leveraging the data that they have within the organization. Now, with that said, one of the things that I do have to recommend is that you start with a solid platform. Now, I come from the mindset where, so I worked for a BI company before, a couple of years ago, before I came to Neudesic. That was a best-of-breed organization. So a best-of-breed organization, we recommended, Hyperion. When Hyperion was, a good idea, we recommended Cognos. When Cognos was a good idea, we recommended Business Objects when Business Objects was a good idea. And each of those products had their niche and the appropriate place and position within the enterprise. Over a period of time, though, one of the interesting things that I found, both working at that organization and since working at that organization, is that one of the difficulties that we constantly struggled with in a best-of-breed type of solution is that, in fact, a lot of the best-of-breed applications don't necessarily want to play well with one another. Plus, then you have the whole learning curve around having to teach, end users and business users new tools and new infrastructures new interfaces. So I've kind of fallen down to this place now through, kind of years of fighting these battles that, it's quite often the most economical. It's the fastest way to get from point A to point B to stick with a platform that stays consistent by by a particular vendor. So that I know SQL Server, the relational database, SQL Server, the analysis services database, their integration services, I know all of those things, reporting services, they're guaranteed to play together and play nice, right? And then as we start moving into things like Performance Point and Excel, I know those things are going to play together and play nice, right? And then as we start to then visualize all this stuff through SharePoint Server, Microsoft, as a business process, make sure that these products work well together and that they kind of extend and enhance one another. And so by kind of starting with that platform, it gives me the ability now to not have to deal with or not have to worry about the integration between the applications. It's one less thing to concern myself with. And at the end of the day, from an interface standpoint, Excel, Performance Point, the other BI tool, SharePoint, that we'll be presenting to the end users are in fact interfaces that the clients are already familiar with. And so that reduces the amount of learning curve that we have to do. Oftentimes the organizations I go into, organizations have already purchased a fair amount of the Microsoft products that they already need. So then it's a few incremental purchases every now and then. But again, we're dealing with, tools that they already know. We're dealing with an integration between tools that everybody is familiar with, and it's not going to be an issue. It's not a question that I have to try and, is this going to work architecturally or not? I know the tools are going to work together, and it reduces the, one less thing that I have to keep on my risk list as the project starts. So once we get down to that single model that I was talking about a minute ago, that unified data model. So inside of SQL Server Analysis Services, starting with version 2005, and it continues into 2008, there's this concept of a unified data model or dimensional model. Depending on who you listen to, they'll call it one or the other. It's effectively the same thing. What this thing is a metadata model, and I hate to get too techie on us, but what it is, it's a metadata model that allows us to put together a view over the top of a bunch of different databases, if you will. And so what this view is like it's a business model, and it's there's a couple of other similar concepts and some other BI tools that are out there, and it's the universes in the business the business objects universe, excuse me. And there's a couple of other tools that have a similar type of model. They do it differently. What Microsoft has done with their model is they allow you to assemble this, business model using standard T-SQL queries. And in fact, they have a graphic design environment so you can actually drag and drop and not even have to write that much T-SQL, if at all, depending on how complex the associations are between these different data sources. But what you end up with at the very end is, in fact, a single model that has multiple data sources underneath it. But from a business standpoint, they don't see any of that complexity. Plus, you also have the ability to kind of rename things. So for anybody that's opened up a CRM database, you'll see that there's, tables and columns within those tables that don't make good business sense. So, the table may be XYZ123, and inside of there is going to be a column name of, GRB107. When in fact, really all it is just a customer's billing address. But you're not going to know that by looking at the table and the column name. So by going through this single model, or this UDM, the Unified Data Model, by going through this, I now have the ability to change that column name from something that was rather obscure that nobody's going to understand. I can now change it to say something as simple as billing address. And now everybody that looks at it from a business standpoint knows exactly what it is. So now I get to begin to translate those. The other thing it does for us as well is that it also gives us the ability to then flatten out common properties. So you'll notice that each of your line of business systems, you're going to have like a date stamp, right? Well, I don't want to have, 6 date stamps inside my unified data model. So what I can actually do is do kind of a union, if you will, for those people that are, that are familiar with the T-SQL vernacular. I can kind of join together all of these date fields into a single property called date. and it'll take all of the dates from my CRM system, all of the dates from my ERP system, all of the dates from my lead generation system, and it'll give me back a unique list of those dates. So I'll make sure that I have one date for everyone, but no duplicate dates. And it'll give me the ability to kind of generate that into a single interface. What the UDM is not, though, and this is kind of important because there's some common misperceptions with some people, is it's not a data warehouse. In fact, the UDM isn't a data warehouse in the sense that you're going to then assemble and store data. You don't need an ETL process to get data into a unified data model. In fact, we can set it up so that that unified data model it either has a caching capability to it if we need it for performance reasons, or if we don't, every query you run against this unified data model can actually run out to the line of business systems and run a query real time. And what that gives us is, kind of real-time accuracy, and it gives us the ability to not have to build, the kind of infrastructure in the middle that a data warehouse may produce, pose. No purchasing of servers, no big ETL processes. And I'm sorry, ETL, the kind of extract, transform, and load, that's the process that we use for moving data from a line of business system into a data warehouse. They refer to as an ETL process. And so we don't have to build all that stuff to get started. What this allows us to do then, you'll notice the last bullet on there, is this UDM can be built and deployed rapidly. So what this gives me the ability to do now is in anywhere from a couple of weeks to a month, depending on how many line of business systems, and in some cases I've done it in a couple of days, if it was just one or two data systems. I can pull in a CRM database, you can pull in a CRM database, you can pull in a leads generation system, you can pull in a help support ticket system, and as long as I've got some sort of common keys between them, and that key may be a date, it may be a customer ID, I may have to do some translations from one customer ID to another customer ID. There's any number of ways that we can do this to kind of line these systems up, but as long as I can find a way to line them up pretty closely, then we can actually go in and kind of diagram up this business model. What happens then is this business model then gets exposed through SQL analysis services, which means then you can use something like Excel to connect to it and then begin to kind of slice and dice your data and run your queries against it. It's a simple tool to use. You can build reports against it using reporting services. You can use ProClarity if you've got that inside of your environment and you want to use ProClarity to do some really cool, data visualization stuff. But once we build this kind of UDM and we deploy it, now I've got a single business model, and I refer to it as a business model because that's exactly what it is. It's this business model. It's a model that makes sense to the business people. So the sales and marketing people can come to this thing, and they'll see a little drop-down that says customer, and then there's a bunch of customers. They can see a drop-down that says geography, and there's a bunch of geographies. They can see products, and they can see date. They can see date bought. They can see, date shipped. And these are the kind of, complexities that we abstract away or we reduce by getting this into a single business model so that it makes sense to the sales and marketing people. And then once we host this thing up, again, we're not building a data warehouse, so all we have to do now is host this thing up on a, on a mid-sized server, and then end users can begin to then query against it. So it's actually it's a fairly rapid way to solve a problem, to be able to see multiple line of business applications. And one of the reasons that I recommend this is because it also gives us a fairly light way to kind of modify and change it. So because we didn't have to build this big ETL system and this big data warehouse and drag all this data over, we can now kind of fine-tune and play with, the logic over systems of record, who owns the data points, what in fact is a duplicate data, a duplicate and what's not. Begin to identify some gaps that we may have. Right? If I really got no way of tracking a customer from my CRM system to my help desk support system, there is absolutely just no way. Then we get this identified, right? So now we can begin to build some infrastructure in from an IT standpoint that begins to, drag those keys over so that inside of either a help desk system or inside of our CRM system, we can then begin to keep track of what the keys are between them. And we can begin to identify those and identify them now, early, quickly, begin to rectify them and fix them before we've gone through the, 6 to 9 month or whatever it is data warehouse process. But don't get me wrong, data warehouses are very effective and they can be very useful, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But what we don't want to do is get on the back side of a data warehouse project and then begin to find out that we got gaps in data and wait, make the business department, the sales and marketing people wait, whatever the timeline is for the data warehouse before they can begin to kind of see what's possible. And if I can begin to show them conversion rates fairly quickly, I can begin to show them customer loyalty fairly quickly, they become very interested in the system. And with that, then we can request additional revenue, for as far as investments, and then we can begin to build out, something a little bit stabler, a little bit larger, that provides some additional value. So I highly recommend this kind of the UDM is building this master record, and I talked a minute ago about what that master record was. And so this is kind of what we're assembling at this point in time is this master record. So now the next step, and I've talked about kind of not having to get into the data warehouse for the first step. Second step is where we actually step into the data warehouse. So the UDM gave us kind of a rapid time to market. When we get into the data warehouse, now we have the ability to begin to track history. We can have the ability to kind of normalize values over multiple line of business systems. When we're talking about normalizing values, this is things like inside of my help desk ticketing system, we might store the city as LA, but inside of our CRM system, we might track it as Los Angeles. Now, when I run a query across all of my customers and their support tickets in Los Angeles, I may not get the LA customers. But when I run it against, LA, I won't get the Los Angeles customers. So as we begin to look at data warehousing, I now have the ability to say, okay, well, LA is actually, in fact, Los Angeles. And so I can actually run that translation now, which will give me a little bit cleaner data. It'll give me some better values. And then kind of the last bullet point on there is I can then begin to run some data mining algorithms across it. So for those people that haven't seen, in SQL Server 2005 Service Pack 1 or 2, I forget which one it is off the top of my head, there were some Excel add-ins that were released for data mining. And what this gave was the business users, the sales and marketing people, the ability to connect up to the UDM that I was talking about a second ago, or to a data warehouse, and begin to run some data mining algorithms. And those would be, there's a whole host of them, and it's a whole other conversation. Certainly can't talk about it in the kind of depth today, but just know that there's a dozen or so data mining algorithms that SQL Server produces that can allow business users to quickly, inside of Excel, and most of these people are going to be analyst types if they're going to get into this, but it's not a technical person. There's no code required. There's no, other than clicking some big icons, and selecting groups of data on the page, it's a very simple thing to do. But even beyond that, there's data mining algorithms that the IT department can run as well. And in there you can begin to do, association algorithms and prediction algorithms and forecast algorithms that begin to allow you as a business partner to begin to talk about where the real value lies within the customer data that you have. And so the title of the slide is Extending the Master Record using data warehousing. So what we've done is we've taken our master record, all the data that we currently store inside of all these line of business systems, and we've added things to it now. Things like the ability to track history, some of the data mining values, and this can include things like intelligent upsells and stuff like that. So there's some pretty interesting pieces there. And as we start to look at data warehousing, we can begin to realize some of the value there. Now, one of the focuses one of the cautions that I want to make at this point, though, is that you stay focused. One of the kind of errors that I see people make, or the common things that I see people do that help them struggle to see the value, is they go really shallow and really wide. So what they try and do is bring in everything about a customer all in one fell swoop, right? And so then they end up with this big, long-term project where it takes them months and months and months just to map all these line of business applications, because we want to know everything about our customer, which means I have to map in all of my ERP system, all of my CRM system, all of my work order management system, all of these pieces of information I need to know in order to truly kind of get a view of my customer. So what I'm suggesting to you, though, is that you pick just a few things. So things like customer conversion I talked about a minute ago. Pick that piece. Stay narrow, drive deep, and find the value in that thing. So when I get done with this first project, I've gotten to the point where I said, look, these are where you get your leads from, and this is the percentage of each of the lead sources from a conversion to prospect, to a conversion to client or customer, to a conversion of an advocate. And so now you begin to see where the value is from a lead source. And when I get to that point, then I move on to the next thing. Okay, now let's talk about customer loyalty. So a couple of things here in customer loyalty. We want to talk about retention and market share, right? Well, first things first, let's find out from a retention standpoint, who some of our best customers are. And I just drive deep down into that, providing and realizing the value on customer retention. And then I go through and I do the same thing for market share, and I drive deep into that. And so that's one of the things I highly recommend is don't try and conquer the world, right? Stay focused, stay narrow, drive deep. In fact, there's another interesting book I talked about, Educating Yourself. There's another interesting book that I didn't put on the slide here, but the name of the book is called Competing on Analytics. For those people that, if you want to email me later on, I'll send you the ISBN for it. But the book is called Competing on Analytics. Very interesting book. And he drives on this point fairly consistently is find a couple of things that you can be competitive on from a business standpoint and compete on those things through using analytics. And so as a business partner and as an IT shop, these are the things that I want to be able to do. I want to identify a couple of key things and just drive deep down onto it and not try and boil the ocean. So then finally the last piece that we want to go to is once we've drilled down into a particular topic area, say, customer retention or market share. Let's do market share. Market share is a good one. So we've done market share and we figure out, customers are purchasing products 1, 2, and 3 from us, but they're not purchasing 4, 5, and 6 from us. We do some analytics. We identify the customers that are actually really good candidates for 4, 5, and 6. Now what we begin to do, and this is kind of a BI theory that I've been kind of trouncing on for a long time, is that we need to move BI from being a destination to being kind of a logical part of the line of business system. And so, here, allow me to explain just a little bit further. So, we did a project for a customer a while back that was doing a call center. And that call center, they had a web-based solution where the CSR reps would be sitting on the phone and they would bring up customer information, and then they would sell them some information. They'd sell them some products, and they'd enter that information into the CSR system, and then they'd move on to the next call. And so they wanted to start talking about BI. So one of the things that we did from a BI standpoint was rather than go and create a BI portal that would force these CSR reps to leave their CSR application and go over and see, hey, how am I doing today in sales? Or, hey, how are we doing today in, clearing the queue of, calls waiting. We, in fact, brought it right to their CSR application. And so we ran some banner ads across the top that showed call center-wide stuff. And then on a panel down the right-hand side of the screen, we then began to show, some very specific things to that CSR rep. So across the top, we're showing, hey, here's how the whole team is doing today in sales. This is how many calls we've gone through. This is how many calls are in the queue. This is the average time that a customer is waiting in the queue. Here's the average sales, volume per call. Those kind of banner ads, rotating across the top. And down the right-hand side, we're specific to him and the call that he was on. So you've taken 5 calls today. You've sold $10,000 in products. And on top of that, we also then started to do upsell stuff, so we could actually pull the information from the current client. So as they've got a customer up inside of their CSR, screen, we could actually pull that information, pass it as a parameter to a report, and that report would then tell the CSR rep, this guy's purchased 1, 2, 3, but he hasn't purchased 4, 5, and 6, and he's actually a really good candidate for it. So why don't we do some recommendations for 4, 5, and 6, and see if we can begin to upsell them into this. And we did it logically so that it was based on what they've already purchased and what they haven't purchased. So unlike AT&T, which keeps offering to sell me their new UVerse IPTV, which I already purchased, because they don't know that I've already purchased it, they keep sending me advertisements over and over and over again. They've probably spent another $100 in marketing money trying to sell me something I already own. Instead, we want to be very intelligent about that and identifying, what does a customer own and what do they not own, so that we can then make some intelligent upsells. And we want to do it in the interface that the salesperson is already in. Don't force them to go someplace else and run a report, because quite frankly, if you're on a call with a customer, the last thing you're going to do is leave that screen where you're inputting the order and go run a report on a customer someplace else and say, oh, hey, I see here you're running, you've already purchased 1, 2, and 3, and let me talk to you about 4, 5, and 6. He's not going to go do it. Maybe some will, but most won't. So when I talk about the first step is to kind of combine the BI data with the line of business systems, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Plus, you also have the ability to then create links within a report that jumps back to the line of business system if it's web-based. So in the case of Microsoft CRM, it's a web-based solution. We can actually create links that jump back not just to the CRM system, but actually to the account within the CRM system, or to a specific screen for an account inside of a CRM system. So now, as managers are looking through these reports, scrolling through and looking for, anomalies, looking for somebody that's a great opportunity, somebody they should be calling next, maybe, and they could be looking through a reporting services report, and on there we can have a link that says call. They can click that link, and we'll take them right to the CRM screen, right to the contact information on that CRM for that CRM account, and then there is his phone number. Now the manager can just pick up the phone and do the dial. He doesn't have to do any more navigation. Now the second step on this slide, and it's not really all that, it's not so easy, but sometimes it's necessary. And there's some clients that we've dealt with where they have to get near real-time BI, where the time that it takes to get data from a line of business system into a data warehouse and then onto a dashboard or get somebody notified is too long. I mean, usually within seconds or minutes, they need to be able to, be notified of an event. And so when you start dealing with that, there are some other ways that you have to solve that. And there's some ways that can be done using, Enterprise Service Bus as a platform. We've actually used that architecture for a number of clients now, where we've used an Enterprise Service Bus as a servicing platform for migrating data or messages from line of business systems notifications to populating data warehouses. That's something I'm not going to push on today too much. I just want to throw it out there. As letting you know that if there's a need or a demand for real-time business intelligence, I recommend that you do a little research around enterprise service buses as a way to populate data warehouses and begin to get some near real-time data with BI anyways. So one of the components that we're talking about from that step one piece I was just talking about a minute ago is this concept of a single pane of glass. Single pane of glass, what this is to a business user, it's the abstraction away of all of the complexities of the IT infrastructure, right? So that a business user has no idea where a line of business system begins and where it ends, where the BI starts, where it ends, where the portal begins or ends, right? They go to a single URL, which happens to link to a SharePoint site. If we're going to stay on the Microsoft platform, they're going to go into a single URL, which is the SharePoint page, and from there, there's going to be navigation. And they're not going to have to open another application as long as they're doing work, right? Except for Outlook, probably. But if they're doing line of business work, BI work, dealing with customers, they don't have to open another application. All of the navigation that they need to go from dealing with an account to looking at the next account they should be dealing with, looking at the performance of an account, looking at, developing campaigns, what leads should we pull this time, what campaign was effective for what types of leads, all of these kind of decisions that they would be asking can all be surfaced up through a single interface. And by using that platform that I talked about a minute ago, and using something like SharePoint and the UDM, and then surfacing, Microsoft CRM or Xapta or some of the other kind of web-based, line of business tools, surfacing those up through SharePoint, you now have the ability to have this single interface for a client. And you've abstracted away all the complexities of all the line of business apps and the BI infrastructure. That's none of the business's business, nor should it be. And in fact, the less they know about it, the better off you are. And the better off it means you're doing your job, because that means they can stay focused on just simply, driving, customer sales. So I talked a minute ago about the messaging bus. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, other than to say, if this is something that if this is an issue inside of your organization, you do need to consider real-time BI. Do some research around messaging buses or enterprise service buses. Send me an email. I'd be more than happy to talk to you some more about the architectures that we've actually begun to implement and the effect that they've had. But there is sometimes, I know there's a lot of people that think that real-time BI is kind of an anomaly and that it can't really be done, when in fact that's not the case. And so finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is kind of the value of the BI enterprise architecture. And so I talked a minute ago about books that we should be reading. So there's a really good book, actually, for those people that haven't read it yet. It's called Enterprise Architecture Strategy, and it's by Jeannie Ross and a couple of other people. Again, email me if you can't find the book. The name of the book, again, is Enterprise Architecture Strategy. And one of the very interesting, conversations or topics that they bring up in this book is that as we begin to build things within our organization, what we don't want to do is build these kind of one-off bolt-ons. And everybody knows this, but, the hard part is figuring out how to create these patterns and what do we include and how do we include it and that kind of stuff. And so the book actually talks about it some. But to the point of our conversation today is that by creating this single pane of glass, we've actually begun effectively, from a business standpoint, begin to kind of create this enterprise architecture. Then all we have to do is now begin to meld the systems together in the background so that they begin to speak to one another. And by doing that, then we can then, in real time, while the customers and customer support reps or the sales and marketing people are actually, in the business of selling a product or of trying to market the product, they can begin to make some effective decisions, and we can provide some feedback to them, immediately around those kind of decisions that they want to make, telling them this is your greatest return on investment, this is a moderate return on investment, this is your lowest return on investment, based on a number of, parameters. And so what we need to do is then begin to boil that up to not just the single pane of glass, but then to begin to meld the architecture and the back end together as well. And this is, again, like I said, read the book or send me an email. I'll be more than happy to send you the ISBN for that. And let me just jump to the end. So, yeah, those are all just kind of beating on the same drum. So a couple of takeaway slides so we can wrap this up. I know we're running a little over, and I apologize. I know we started a little bit late. But I just want to make sure we're considerate of everybody's time. So takeaways, first thing I'd recommend, is evolve your BI thinking. Don't think of CRM BI as just the, kind of the out-of-the-box reports that come with your CRM system. Think about measuring and optimizing beyond just the data that exists inside of your BI, your CRM system. That's the second point, is evolve your thinking around the 360 customer view. Seriously, if you're in the IT space or the CRM space inside of an IT organization today, you should really know where all customer data is being stored. Where is my customer data being stored? I got some of it here, I got some of it there. I know there's a bunch of line of business applications. You really should know, who owns what piece of information around this, right? And as we haven't even talked about master data management, but this is always kind of a conversation that's kind of resurfacing again, around master data management, is that we begin to think about, if I change a billing address inside of my finance system, how do I get that billing address inside of my CRM system updated as well, right? And then when I run my report on, my customers and their information, how do I make sure that I'm in fact getting the billing system their correct billing address, right? I'm not getting the wrong one. And so that's, kind of this evolving your thinking around that 360 customer view. I'm not saying take on the whole enterprise master data management process, but I think you do as either the CRM person or as the BI person, you do need to know where all your BI data is around your customers, right? And then lastly on this slide, it's talking about evolving your relationship. So once I've figured out that there's more to my role within the organization than just building some standard kind of out-of-the-box reports and dashboards, and I've evolved my role into understanding that that the customer data is more than just the CRM database, so that's a good portion of it usually. Then the next thing I can do is then educate myself, and I can start providing some business value back to the sales and marketing organization, saying, hey, look at, if I get this one more little piece of information, I can then begin to tell you, you know, what the greatest customer conversion process is. You know, what's the greatest return on investment, who your greatest leads are. You know, if we were to implement this referral program, you know, and you determine, you know, what we give out for, you know, somebody giving a referral, but if we were to implement this referral program, I can then begin to tell you not only who your greatest leads are, you know, but I can also begin to tell you who our greatest advocates are, right? And you bring that back to the business, sales, and marketing organizations so that you're driving, you know, this from a technology standpoint. You're kind of pushing back on them and putting some pressure on them rather than putting pressure on you to come up with another report that has an additional column in it. And then finally, this 360-degree customer view in the past has often been avoided, you know, the assembling of all of these line of business applications, you know, because of the expense and the complexity, time to market, enterprise disruption. I mean, you know, most people think they had to go through this kind of data warehousing process, and even that's kind of a dirty word in a lot of organizations still today, you know, because data warehousing projects, you know, have a high, at least in the past, have had a high propensity for failure. Because of just kind of the politics and the complexity and all the line of business applications. You know, but the truth of the matter is that it doesn't have to be that way. And if you implement something like the UDM as a first phase, as we talked about a minute ago, where I can begin to kind of model and mock up and I can rapidly change and let it evolve and add in new things fairly quickly, over a very short period of time, I can absolutely begin to present some value back to an organization that they can see. And then and then it just evolves, and the more that I continue to have sales and marketing people coming in through that unified data model for their data, the greater the abstraction that I have away from the kind of the complexities that are underneath. It allows me then to build this kind of larger infrastructure that allows me to provide additional value. And then I can enhance that infrastructure and provide additional value. So really the idea and kind of the point of the conversation today was if you find ways to incrementally provide value, then traditionally, and I haven't had a sales and marketing organization yet tell me, no, you know what, we've got all the information about our customers we need. No, I really don't, you know, I'm not really interested in those kind of analytics. I haven't had anybody say that to me. Quite frankly, most sales and marketing organizations would be more than happy to know anything they can about their customers. And if you, as the person that's in charge of BI or in charge of CRM, or if you're playing in this space at all, if you can begin to think about what we can measure and how we can begin to provide some value back to the organization, the tools and the technologies are there today to allow you to do it quickly and rapidly. You just have to be smart about how to use them. So with that said, I am done. I don't have a last slide. What happened there? So I'm all done, Dion.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. Again, thanks everybody for staying with us. And we ran a bit over because of our late start time. We do have a few questions. Again, we are recording the website, so definitely encourage people, if they want to stay, please stay. But again, we will make sure that this recording is available to you. So that follow-up email will come from me, from Dion Mishler. I don't know how many of you have other Dions in your world, but hopefully that'll be pretty easily identifiable. So, Steve, I think one of the questions that we do have coming in is really, you know, you've talked about a bunch of different things, and definitely, you know, the BI beast, it can be huge, and it's definitely for businesses nowadays, the devil's in the details. So what would be the first step to taming some of those details and really being able to leverage our business and what we do every day to help us make decisions and grow our business? What would be a good first step?
So, you know, I think kind of the points that we were talking about a minute ago around, you know, picking, and I hate to say it depends, but it does. But I think you do need to pick that one area where you can be victorious quickly and go after it.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. There was a client that I walked into a couple of months ago. They wanted to do a CRM BI project on customer data. It was an e-commerce site, and they were doing marketing campaigns, and they wanted to do this huge kind of marketing campaign to determine a BI solution to figure out what the response rates were for the email campaigns that were going out. And so we took a look at it, and it was truly a valid request, and it was something they absolutely needed. And so we were kind of taking a look at that. Well, while we're in this process, process, I'm also having a conversation with a couple of the salespeople and some of the other people that are in the organization talking about ways that they can begin to leverage and use this information. And it came out during the course of the conversation that, in fact, the salespeople have to track all of their sales for the day on a big whiteboard because they didn't have a single view for the sales that they had done for that day. And so every time somebody would make a sale, they'd have to go over to a whiteboard and write it down. And so I thought that was really interesting. So I went back and took a look at the system and found out that, you know what, in about 2 weeks, I could build a little, UDM that would allow the business people, the salespeople, to actually see what their sales were for the day, the week, the month, the year, and I could do it in just a couple of weeks. Whereas their, the marketing response rate data warehousing project that they were looking at was probably going to take closer to, 3 to 4 months. And so one of the recommendations I'd made back to them was, in fact, you know what, let's pick this low-hanging, very valuable piece of fruit and take this one off first. And we did, and we knocked it out in a couple of weeks. Salespeople were very happy. CEO, who happens to have been a former salesperson, was, astonished and amazed at, what we could get done very quickly, and was, more than happy then to fund the larger kind of marketing project around the response rates. So, so to that point, I think it's, there's kind of a value benefit process that you can walk through and take a look around and say, hey, you know what, this is a very valuable kind of low-hanging fruit, and if you start there, rather than start trying to boil the ocean, and you answer some very specific questions, then you're almost always going to be far more successful than if you try and, conquer the world or boil the ocean. I'll come up with another analogy in a minute.
Absolutely. And then one other question, Tricia, for you. Obviously, when we're talking about some of the Microsoft components, and licensing plays such a big part from a cost perspective in initiating some of these projects. So the question we have is really, how can we leverage licensing for our business and be effective and efficient and not break the bank?
Sure. Well, that's a multi-tiered question. The first thing is to ensure that each customer is on the right licensing program for their environment. So we can come in and help out with any of the analysis, looking at how companies have been purchasing in the past, where they want to go, what type of projects they want to implement in the immediate future, and then customize a program using the Microsoft programs that are available to us for that organization. And it provides them with more of a roadmap as to what technology will be available to them, again, for their immediate project and long-term, and also help them to purchase licensing in a cost-effective and strategic way. In addition, there's always, other tools out there like Microsoft Finance where you can bundle licensing and projects, like the projects together, to help companies to be able to procure the licensing that they need and move forward with the projects and not have to break the bank, like you say.
Absolutely, and that's a good point too. Microsoft Financing, the Microsoft Financing arm, it's a whole group of folks out there, and we've actually utilized Microsoft Financing with some of our current clients to make sure that the solution from a financial side matched our customers' budget, and it worked well for them. So I think we don't have any other questions right now. We are going to wrap up. The last component I'd mention is we will be following up with all of you via email, and the takeaway from today, among all of the things that Steve had talked about, is part of what Neudesic and Software One can bring to the table in talking with you and your teams is we can offer an architectural design session. If this is something you are interested in and do want to move forward with, we'd definitely be happy to set up that meeting, come on in and have a discussion and see where we're at, help solve some of the problems or overcome some roadblocks within your environment to get some good BI strategy taking place. So without further ado, again, thank you so much for joining us today and bearing with us through our technical difficulties. Again, we will follow up with you, providing Steve's presentation as well as the recorded version when it becomes available. And then, of course, in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to myself
for any additional information. If you'd like to set up some time with Steve and your local account management representatives, as well as Software One and Microsoft, we'll be happy to have that conversation with you and move things forward throughout your organization. So again, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.